The two most common motives for faking one's death seem to either be insurance fraud or to escape a criminal investigation or conviction. When facing a possibility of life in prison, it's not surprising that people make irrational decisions, such as faking their own death. Not only does a person have to fake their death, but they have to create a whole new identity to live out the rest of their lives, which isn't a simple task. Here are 5 people who faked their own death and almost got away with it. Number 5. I'd like to begin this story by apologizing for any awful pronunciations that are about to follow. But when news reached residents of Ukraine that Russian-born journalist Arkady Babchenko had been shot and killed inside his Kiev apartment, people were in disbelief. Like many journalists, Babchenko wasn't popular with the Russian government, as on many occasions he'd published controversial articles and made statements on social media exposing the corruption in Russia. In regards to one post, he said, "I did not call for anything or insult anyone. I just reminded my readers that Russia was indiscriminately bombing Aleppo, without recognizing that dozens of children were dying in those bombs, and their photographs were making their way around the world." Following this controversial post, his home address and other personal information were made public, causing Babchenko and his family to flee to the safety of Ukraine, where he carried on working as a journalist, determined to get the truth out. On May 29, 2018, international news outlets began reporting that Babchenko had been assassinated in his apartment. They stated that he'd been shot 3 times and was found lying face down. As per the topic of this video, this was a staged crime scene. The bullet wounds were little more than SFX makeup, and the blood came from a pig. Babchenko had been working with the Ukrainian Security Service, or USS, to help expose corrupt members of the government. According to their intel, a Ukrainian middleman had been hired by the Kremlin in Russia to assassinate as many as 30 journalists and dissidents who spoke out against the Russian government. Babchenko stunned the public when just a day after his supposed death, he appeared at a press conference with the USS. The conference outlined the intel the service had collected over the past few months and what they planned to do with it. As of 2019, Babchenko, his wife, and 6 adopted children and his biological daughter are all in exile in Israel, although others have said he's living in Estonia or Finland. He's vowed to return to the Ukraine one day and promises to never give up on reporting the truth. Number 4. The case of John Darwin is an example of how tumultuous and dangerous water can be. Well, it would be if Darwin's death hadn't been a complete hoax, of course. On March 21, 2002, John took his kayak just off the coast of Seaton Carew, located in County Durham, England. The small seaside town sits just on the edge of the North Sea coast between Hartlepool and River Tees. What should have been a relaxing day for John soon turned into a living nightmare for the whole Darwin family. He'd set out in the early morning but failed to get back to shore and arrive at work as per his normal routine. Knowing how dangerous the sea can be, his family called the Coast Guard right away and reported him missing, prompting a huge sea search for the missing man. Despite searching 62 miles, there was no sign of John. The search crew had to deliver the heartbreaking news to John's wife and family. All was not what it seemed, however. To the outside world, his wife Anne Darwin played the part of a heartbroken spouse who would stop at nothing to find her husband and father of their 2 children. But behind closed doors, she was hiding a dark secret, and that secret was her husband. It transpired in 2007 that John Darwin had not died on that cold March 2002 morning. He'd been living next door in a bedsit the whole time. He took on the name John Jones and changed his appearance and laid low before attempting to move to Panama. On the day of his disappearance, John abandoned his canoe, traveled to Durham train station with the help of his wife, and hid out in the Lake District. When the heat had died down and his death certificate had been finalized, Anne Darwin sneaked him back to the family home where he lived in the bedsit next door. During the 5 years that John had supposedly been dead, his wife Anne had gained $25,000 from life insurance, $25,000 from a pension and $58,000 from a prison service pension, as well as $4,000 from the Department of Work and Pensions, then a further $137,000 from other insurance policies, totaling an eye-watering $250,000. The whole time that John had been alive and living just meters away, his two sons had been grieving the loss of their father. The game was finally up for John and Anne when changes to visas in Panama meant that John's new identity would be quickly rumbled. So instead, he had the bright idea to return to the UK, turn himself in at a police station, and claim that he had no memory of the last 5 years. The Darwins hadn't been too careful though, as police soon found photos of the pair in Panama in 2006, and that's when the whole fake death unraveled. When confronted about the photo, Anne said, "Yes, that's him. My sons will never forgive me." Darwin was sentenced to 6 years in prison for insurance fraud, but only served 3 of that term. The courts have ordered him to pay back over $600,000 in restitutions. His now ex-wife, Anne, was sentenced to 6.5 years in fraud and money laundering. Number 3. One of the strangest stories to come out of 2011 is that of Emmanuel Parisis, also known as Neil McLaren. Emmanuel was a dentist held in high regard within his community and by his patients. However, his $135,000 a year paycheck just wasn't enough to sustain his luxurious lifestyle. In a bid to make even more money, Emmanuel took a holiday to Amman, Jordan, in 2009, where he got into a car crash and faked his own death. Not only did he fake a death certificate, but he also moved to Aberdeenshire, Scotland, from his home in Devon, England, where he carried on practicing as a dentist. Originally from Greece, Emmanuel had 15 different life insurance policies and hoped to be the recipient of $1.75 million, an amount that would have certainly set him up for life. His main motivation for claiming the policies was to be able to clear his $379,000 debt and use the rest to allow him and his family to live a life of luxury. Detective Inspector Mike West of the Major Crime Investigations Team of Devon and Cornwall said, "We were dealing with an extremely complex individual who was complex and calculated. The worst part of the case was that Emmanuel's children were led to believe for years that their father had died before they were reunited in Scotland years later." Emmanuel was sentenced to serve 5 years for defrauding insurance companies and the General Dental Council. What's more is that he also came under question as to the legitimacy of his qualifications. He'd been registered as a dentist under both aliases, but the GDC believed both of these documents to be fake. Number 2. Often called the most wicked man in the world, Aleister Crowley was no stranger to publicity, whether that was for good or bad. Known for his dabbing in the dark arts and magic circles, Aleister was known for his questionable behavior and odd cult-like following. In September of 1930, when he was 54 years old, he traveled to Portugal with a 19-year-old German woman who was self-proclaimed as his follower of his sexual magic circle. The relationship between the two was troubled to say the least, with the 19-year-old woman becoming somewhat of an annoyance to Aleister. So when he met up with poet Fernando Pessoa, the pair hatched a plan to fake his own death. He wrote a final goodbye to his German lover that read, "I cannot live with you, Boca do Inferno," which translates to "Mouth of Hell, will get me. It will not be as hot as yours." With that, Aleister mysteriously disappeared, leading the German woman to believe he'd taken his own life from the large cliff in Lisbon. It wasn't until 3 weeks later that the truth was outed. Aleister appeared in Berlin, very much alive and well, just in time for the opening of his art exhibit. Given Aleister's bizarre life, this is perhaps not the strangest tale you'll ever hear about him. Number 1. Political scandals are certainly nothing new, especially if the age of quote fake news, alternative truths, and political discourse taking over social media. But for the people of the UK, the story of ex-Labour MP John Stonehouse is one that still captivates and captures people's imaginations. After studying at the London School of Economics, John began working with the African Cooperative Society in Uganda. John had also served in the RAF as a pilot between 1944 to 46, which massively aided in his knowledge of African countries. For many years, he tried to become an MP until finally, in 1957, at the age of 32, he was elected as the Labour MP for Wednesbury. Not content with his career, he began spying for Soviet forces in Czechoslovakia, exchanging British aviation secrets for $5,000, which is worth about $71,000 in today's money. For many years, he went undetected by the British government and earned himself several promotions. He was an MP from 1957 to 1974. He'd been the Aviation Minister, Minister of State and Technology, Postmaster General, and Minister of Posts and Telecommunications, all while selling secrets to the very enemy he was trying to destroy, the Soviets. By 1970, his secrets had been outed. He'd been expelled from the Labour Party, and with the Czechoslovakians having no use for him, his options were soon very limited. So he decided to fake his own death in an attempt to run away and start a new life with his secretary, Sheila Buckley. Under the new name of Joseph Markham, John traveled to Miami, Florida. It was on November 20th, 1974, that he placed his clothes on Miami Beach and vanished just as mysteriously as he had appeared. John decided to try his luck in Australia and began living under yet another name. Meanwhile, his family and colleagues in the UK had assumed he'd taken his own life and held a funeral for him. John Stonehouse was finally caught thanks to another case. That's the case of Lord Lucan. Lord Lucan's nanny had been beaten to death and Lord Lucan was nowhere to be found. So when a British man was spotted moving large sums of money between different banks, police thought they had their man. It wasn't the infamous Lord Lucan, it was the disgraced ex-Labour MP John Stonehouse. When confronted, he told Australian police everything and was soon sent back to the UK to face up to his crimes. The official charges he was facing were theft, fraud, conspiracy to defraud, causing a false police investigation, and wasting police time. For this, he was sentenced to just 7 years in prison and forced to resign as an MP. John Stonehouse passed away at age 62 in 1988 after collapsing and suffering from his 4th heart attack. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.